tell me your story, for you're gone.
Howdy, this is the Fresh Toones Show, and my name is Dave Puls. And the focus of today's show is telling our stories. And I'll be sharing a couple of those stories that I've written and put some sound effects to, and I hope to inspire other folks to find some way to tell their story. I'm not really much of a writer, but a number of years ago I started out keeping a journal and wrote in it most mornings my thoughts of what I did the day before or what I hoped to do in that day. I also got into sharing some of the thoughts about what's going on in our country, and when I got writing, sometimes I just share some of my thoughts about politics of the day or social activism that I hope to be part of, and sometimes just basically how I was going to be able to share some of my ideas. This first story is called The Choir Boy's Muzzle, and it's my experience of being in a choir as a young 12-year-old or 13-year-old and being encouraged to keep my voice down because my voice was changing. It's got some humorous moments. So I'm going to share that story with you, and maybe it'll inspire you to think of something in your childhood that you could share with others. It's a story based on my memories from when I was 13 years old in 1966. It was our last Saturday for choir practice before the big Easter service. Peter Rapp and I were standing as far in the back of the choir as possible. It was right where Mrs. Miller had directed us to be. Mrs. Miller was our choir director, and apparently Pete's and my voice were not to her liking. If it were up to her, I'm sure that she'd had both of us singing from behind the altar. We were 13, and our voices were changing, so no one knew what would come out of our larynx at any moment. It wasn't uncommon to hear one of our voices crack from time to time, but we kept singing, much to Mrs. Miller's exasperation. She'd be motioning the singers in the front to raise their voices while directing Pete and me to sing as softly as possible. We didn't always respond as quickly as she would have liked, but we were just singing our praises to the Lord, so we didn't always pick up on her frustration. By the end of practice, most of the choir members were excited, and we were ready for the big show. Mrs. Miller, on the other hand, appeared somewhat browbeaten and uncertain about the choir's readiness for the next day. I headed home feeling pretty good. I really enjoyed singing, and I was looking forward to singing some more in our neighborhood rock band later that afternoon. After scarfing down a quick lunch, I grabbed my guitar and headed down our street to meet up with my friends to rock out on the newest hits. We were all set up and ready to get into it when I realized that there was no mic for me to sing into. I knew there were more mics around from previous jams, but once again I was being asked to move to the back and to sing softly. I still hadn't got the hint, so I just sang out like any rock star would, much to the chagrin of my bandmates. As we played along, we began to do more instrumentals, and when we did do a song, they'd always find some abbreviated doo-wop background vocals for me. My older bandmates, like Mrs. Miller, would emphasize how soft to keep my voice, so I tried my best to go along. When we met again after supper, we loosened up, and we began to yell our rock lyrics more than sing them. No one seemed to care about my singing as the evening went on, and my voice started to feel a little scratchy. We were all just jamming out and letting our hair down. The next morning when I woke up, I hardly had any voice, but I still decided to go to church with the hopes that my voice would come back. When I arrived at the church, Mrs. Miller was noticeably flustered, and I think she had some doubts about the choir's upcoming performance. As the members of the choir were putting on their robes, a more relaxed Mrs. Miller came in and told us that she had just learned that Peter was sick and that he wouldn't be joining us. I swear she had a slight smile on her face when she announced it, but I couldn't figure out why. I wasn't looking forward to telling her that I had lost my voice, but I raised my hand and she called on me. "I'm sorry to tell you, Mrs. Miller, that I've lost my voice and I won't be able to sing." She started to smile, but reeled it in. She looked towards the heavens as if to say, "Thank you, my prayers have been answered." She was very comforting and told me that things like this happen sometimes. It would be fine for me to just mouth the words. I told her that I could try to sing, but she assured me that there was no need to strain my voice any further. As we were preparing to go to the choir loft, Diane Pearsall nudged me and offered me a Smith Brothers cough drop for my throat. I shook one from the small red box and thanked her. I appreciated the soothing effect that it had on my throat, and I began to hope that I might be able to sing after all. The service had been going on for almost an hour now, and it was time for the choir to do its thing. We all rose with our lyrics in hand, and the choir sang without me. As I mouthed the words, I could feel my voice starting to return. It was either a Smith Brothers miracle or the spirit of Easter that was bringing my voice back. I began to sing like never before, and the whole choir sounded like angels to me. Mrs. Miller apparently heard something different and began to direct me with her palms down to soften my voice. We were approaching the climactic crescendo, and I just closed my eyes and let it rip. When I opened my eyes, I saw Mrs. Miller flapping her arms in a frantic attempt to get me to quiet my voice down. By the way she was flapping her arms, it was lucky she didn't take right off and ascend into heaven. We finished the hymn, and her arms went totally limp. She looked exhausted as a number of beads of sweat ran down her forehead. After the service, we were all congratulating each other for a job well done. Everyone was heading out, and as I approached the hallway to leave, I heard Mrs. Hanson talking to Mrs. Miller. "Mabel, that was quite a fiasco. I guess you needed a muzzle for that caterwauling choir boy of yours." Mrs. Miller didn't respond and marched up the stairs and out the door. I don't know who she was referring to, but I don't think it was very nice. As I walked past her, she had an annoyed look on her face. But my only thought was, what's your problem? I headed home for lunch and another afternoon of band practice. Not too long after that, the hair under my armpits started to grow in, and more pubic hairs were sprouting up as my voice changed for the better. And now, ever since then, I've been strumming my guitar and singing my songs.
We're gonna sing it 'cause we like to sing this way. You don't like it, I guess that's just okay.
And that was called The Choir Boy's Muzzle. Yeah, at a young age, folks were trying to muzzle me and keep me quiet, and it didn't work then, and doesn't seem to be working now for those that are telling me to just lay off it and keep it down and just live your life and let's not think about things too much. Well, I ended that story with a song that I wrote many years after that incident in choir, and it's called I'm Gonna Sing It. So I figured, well, this is as good a spot as any to share that whole song with you. I'm gonna sing it.
I'm gonna sing it every day. I'm gonna sing it 'cause I like to sing this way. If you don't like it, well, I guess that's just okay. I wanna sing it from my heart. I wanna live it with a life that's worth the living. If I ever lose my way, I can always sing my way back home. Sing it now. it with all your might. Sing it even if they put out the lights. You can sing in the dark, you can sing all night tonight. We're gonna sing it every day. We're gonna sing it 'cause we like to sing this way. If you don't like it, I guess that's just okay. We're gonna sing it every day. We're gonna sing it 'cause we like to sing this way. You don't like it, I guess that's just okay.
Well, I'm still singing and having a grand time doing it, still writing songs after, 45 years or so. Usually I'd go right into another story, but I have another song that's very related to this time period in my life, around 13. The Beatles were a big hit and had come to this country. This is another song about that experience and maybe being told to keep my voice down. It's called 30 Long Years and More. And it's about if you can truly sing your song and express yourself, you'll be singing down the road for 30 long years and more.
I was 12, the Beatles were hot. We'd sing their songs, they say, Dave, you've got to stop. But I've been singing 30 long years and more. They stopped singing a long time ago, but I'm still singing, got plenty more to go. And I'm still singing 30 long years and more. If anyone should tell you to stop singing your song, just ask them kindly to move it on along, and you'll be singing 30 long years and more. Well, they might throw you the ugliest look, strut right off with their nose stuck up, but you'll be singing 30 long years and more. Don't know where this song is taking me to, but I know what this singing has brought me through, and I've been singing 30 long years and more. And always be true to your song, and you'll always be where you belong, and you'll be singing 30 long years and more. And always be true to your song, and you'll always be where you belong, and you'll be singing 30 long years and more. And you'll be singing 30 long years and more.
Yeah, that's probably some of the best advice I can give any young person is always stay true to your song, and you'll be singing 30 long years and more. Not much better advice than I can give anybody. Well, to get back to our theme on today's Fresh Toones show, I'm going to share another story of mine. It's called The Young Thespian's Remorse. I was never comfortable, like a lot of folks, getting up and performing in front of folks. This is a story when I was in elementary school, and it was kind of the routine every year. A class would put on a play or something. And at first I was pretty excited because I ended up getting the starring role. But as things got closer to the actual performance in front of the audience, I chickened out. I never felt that good about it. And later in life I had to get myself up and get up in front of folks and share my music and share my songs and take the risk. It's probably the best thing to do as a young person, to give it a shot. Of course, I was a young adult at the time when I first started performing in front of an audience. So I'll give you a little background to where my fear of performing came from in this story called The Young Thespian's Remorse. It's based on my memories from when I was 9 years old in 1961. Mrs. Fastener had just finished assigning the girls their parts in this year's class play. I dreaded this part of 4th grade, and there was no way I wanted to participate, other than maybe playing a tree in the forest or maybe a rock. Our teachers started to ask for volunteers from the boys, and only a couple raised their hands. She assigned some secondary acting parts, but she still needed the star character, Peter Cottontail, a.k.a. Peter Rabbit. Well, there wasn't any way that I was going to be hopping around the stage with a big fluffy white tail stuck to my butt, so I slumped down into my seat and almost disappeared totally behind my desk. Still hunched down, I looked over, and there was Sharon Taylor looking at me with a big smile on her face. I sat up a little and smiled back. Sharon was the girl I liked the most in class, and she had taken the part of Mrs. Rabbit for our play, The Tale of Peter Rabbit. Mrs. Fastener was asking again for a volunteer for the Peter Rabbit character, but there still weren't any takers. Sharon was motioning me with her head for me to raise my hand, and when her smile became overpowering, I felt emboldened. When I came out of my trance, my hand was raised and Miss Fastener was saying, "Thank you, David. You'll make a fine Peter Rabbit." I had forced a smile on my face, and I tried to act like I was glad to have been given the part. I nodded over to Sharon, and she smiled. That afternoon, we started rehearsing, and it wasn't quite as bad as I thought it would be. Of course, there was only Mrs. Fastener in the audience, and everybody else, except for the kids playing trees and rocks, had rabbit ears and cottontails stuck on, so it didn't seem that terrible. I was hopping around with the best of them, and my lines were pretty simple to remember, so I had no worries. This was going to be a piece of cake, and besides, Sharon had a new respect for me. We rehearsed a number of times again before the grand opening, and Sharon and I were becoming quite the stars. We were laughing between takes, and I couldn't have hoped for a better way to impress her. The weekend came, and I totally forgot about the class play. I woke up very early on Monday, the day of the big play, and I was sweating profusely. I was having a panic attack. Stage fright had taken over as I envisioned a packed auditorium of proud parents and potentially mocking schoolmates. I decided to use my sweating as a good cover for not going to school. I called my mom, who was already dressed up and ready for her son's big day on the stage, and moaned, "Mom, I'm feeling sick to my stomach." She picked up my official NFL wastebasket and put it next to my head beside the bed, and then put her hand on my forehead. She didn't like what she felt and went to get the thermometer. I didn't have a temperature, so she advised me to rest a little while and see if I felt any better when it was time to get up. After she left the room, I started moaning and groaning like I'd never done before. I put on an act right there in the bed that could have won an Academy Award. It wasn't long before I could hear her calling the school. When I went back to school the next day, I was describing to my classmates how sick I had been. I was much more graphic when telling the boys, and they seemed to eat it right up. I wanted to be sure that everyone, especially Sharon, believed me. During recess, the more I described how sick I had been, the woozier I began to feel. When I got back to the classroom and I sat down, I saw Sharon, and she was making eyes at Eddie Brinkman. It seems that Eddie had stood in for me the day of the play, and now he and Sharon were best of friends. I was really feeling sick now, but before I could get up to leave, I reared back and then let hurl my lunch, breakfast, and bits of last night's dinner. It wasn't pretty, and that day lived on in infamy for the rest of 4th grade. I never again had to worry about impressing Sharon, because she hardly ever looked at me after that. In a way, I was the star of the show, just not in the way I would have preferred. Well, it certainly felt like the end of the world on that day when I hurled all over my desk. Pretty embarrassing. I didn't think I'd ever share that story too much with folks, but I think it's a reality that had to be shared, and that's why I wrote that story. And it leads me right into a fresh tune of mine called It's Not the End of the World.
1, 2, 3, 4. Well, they don't like my looks. They say my nose looks like a hook. And they don't like the colors of my eyes. But that's not the end of the world. No, that's not the end of the world. They don't like my songs. They say I sing them all wrong. They say the words are passé. But that's not the end of the world. No, that's not the end of the world. Might come someday if you try to look and sing in someone else's way. Find the tune that makes you smile and sing your love in just your own style. We're back on the tracks again, rolling up and around the bend, and we're singing with all our might. So I guess it's not the end of the world. No, I guess it's not the end of the world. So I guess it's not the end. I guess it's not the end. I guess it's not the end of the world.
Well, I think we've got time for one more story. This one's called The Good Boy's Sacrifice. It's based on my memories from when I was 12 years old in 1964. What would motivate a 12-year-old boy to get himself up at 7:45 every Saturday morning? Why, the Three Stooges show, of course. They were totally off the wall and just what I needed before going to confirmation class each week, where I sat for 2 hours and was taught the edicts of the Lutheran Church. Like a starter's pistol, the blast of my alarm clock would go off at exactly 7:45, and I would be off to the races. I wasn't going to miss 1 minute of pure escapism with Larry, Moe, and Curly. I would use the bathroom, brush my teeth, throw on some clothes, mix up some cocoa, have some toast spread with butter and sprinkled with cinnamon sugar, and then settle down for 51 glorious minutes of the most inane humor ever created. I savored every minute of that show before heading into the den of interminable boredom, where I had to endure some well-regimented instruction. At least in class, I was able to sit across from my girlfriend, Regina Malloy. I don't know if she was officially my girlfriend, but I did walk her home after class each week. We never even held hands, let alone kissed. But I always had goo-goo eyes for her. I never saw too much interest and response, but my imagination could work wonders. At 10 minutes to 9 each Saturday, I was being hollered at by my father to get into the car for class.
Hurry up.
He would get pretty angry at me for being so engrossed in watching the TV, or what he called an idiot box. My dad was a janitor, I mean the sexton of our church, and he would do his work while I was in class. He was also an officer of the church, and he didn't like the idea of his son being late, especially when it involved watching the boob tube. As I sat in class hearing about the rules of the road for Lutherans, my mind would sometimes drift back to the Stooges. I had been rudely dragged away from my last 9 minutes of the show, and now I began to imagine how the episode might have ended. I'm sure that there would have been some whoop 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 whooping by Curly, and Moe would have done some hair yanking on Larry before the Three Blind Mice theme song would have wrapped up the show. I always had quite a vivid imagination, and sometimes I wouldn't know how long I had been away before returning to the real world. The real world often seemed to be seriously lacking in a lot of attributes that I felt drawn to, so I sought out more fulfilling, exotic worlds. I was drifting back from my Three Stooges fantasy episode when I heard Pastor Pesky asking the class, "Who are the three persons in the Blessed Trinity?" The rest of the class was half asleep and looked like they hadn't gotten out of bed 10 minutes before class, and no one was answering. Our normally sedate teacher began to lose his patience and said, "Come on, people, let's wake up." All he heard was crickets. With a frustrated look towards heaven, he appeared to be praying for more patience when he blurted out, "Who are the three members of the holy team who motivate us every Saturday to get up early to study their ways?" Out of nowhere, I felt a tap on my left shoulder, and someone whispered in my ear, "Tell 'em, Larry, Moe, and Curly." I glanced sideways and I saw a miniature Roger, the bad boy in the class, dressed up in a red devil's costume, standing on my shoulder and prodding me with a pitchfork. After a few good pokes from little Beelzebub Raj, I heard a sweet voice calling out to me, "Don't do it, David. You're a good boy." I looked over, and on my other shoulder was the miniature Regina in a snow-white gown, smiling lovingly at me. I glanced back and forth between the two coaches as though I was watching a match at Wimbledon. One side was poking and prodding me to say it, and the other was gently reminding me to live up to my reputation. As I was struggling to decide how to answer the question, I came out of my fantasy world, and I realized that I'd just been called on personally for the answer. My better angel went out that day, and I said, "The Father, Son, and Holy Ghost." It put a big satisfying look on Pastor Pesky's face, and I could almost hear him say with his eyes, "Good boy, now here's a cookie for you." There wasn't really any cookie to be had, and shortly after that, Regina dumped me for Roger. It seems that she had developed an attraction for bad boys. I ended up walking home alone, but I still had plenty of imagination and a lot of stories yet to live. That's it for the Fresh Toones show today. Thanks for tuning in.